Oh, while we're speaking of recordings, I think we need to maybe have a meeting sometime about the archive, because I understood
Oh,
that
yeah.
some of the archive was disappeared.
Yeah,
But
Carolyn was working on it, and I think we just got kind of slammed with some
yeah.
due dates and reports and things, but
Mhm.
it's still on one of my sticky notes.
Okay, and the thing is, every time you put on the recording, at the end of the thing, it asks you, like to save it. And if you,
Right.
even if you haven't saved it, if you still have that thing, you should be able to click on it and get those recordings. And that's about the most pristine you could have. Because as I understand it, people were looking for it like on Facebook or something like that. But you know.
Because we purged our Zoom recordings. This was a while back, and so it's those older ones that are
Was there a reason?
Questionable.
Just out of curiosity.
We didn't have space. We ran out of storage on our Zoom account.
Okay, but when you save it on your computer. And then
now we do. We thought we had downloaded them. So that was just a misunderstanding. We thought they were downloaded and in our shared docs, and unfortunately they weren't. So we're trying to figure out which ones we have from Zoom and which ones we might have to scalp off of Facebook.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And all of these things, if something like that can like really go under the radar and you think that you got it all covered, but not so much, because you missed that one little, you forgot to put the comma there,
Right. Yeah, it wasn't all of them. So like I said, it's figuring out which ones we might need to gather from Facebook.
Okay. All right. Well, once you get those together, let's talk about how we convert those into like a podcast /vlog or something else, so that we can send people can even subscribe to them,
Yeah, and we will be putting them, once we have some time, putting them on our YouTube. So we do have a station for brainstorming, where they will go.
Well, understanding that it's another thing that you end up putting in your schedule, and I don't pick that lightly. But that said, if you can do a penny's worth of work and get $1 worth of return, to me, that's an advantage. You know what I mean? So if we can put it on, somehow get it into that mix of podcasts, and since mostly what we're, most of the time we don't have anything that's visually dependent, and in the cases we do, well, those maybe fall through the crack, though you can make those visually done too on podcasts. But there's a whole group of people who, if you make it available for podcasts, they can download it, play it on the radio in their car and stuff like that. That's a whole different audience. So I'm a make once, use many kind of guy,
Rock on. All right. We're about 3 minutes away from 10:30. We have 4 guests waiting to come in. Do you want to wait, or would you like them to come in?
Oh, and wait another couple minutes, I suppose. And then we'll get started.
Okay.
Oh, I know, Jessica, what I was going to ask is, usually there's an email that comes out on Thursday mornings.
I just realized I forgot to schedule that one.
Oh,
I was logging in and I was like, oh no.
So did you do it? Did you do it now?
No, it's out on Facebook, but I can do a quick one.
Yeah,
Here, I'll go
because a
on
lot of
Facebook.
people, they depend on that to remind
They'll
them.
just click. So,
Mhm. Yes, that's right too, because they don't know how to get on unless they get that email that has a click through.
Yeah, those people that don't understand the internet,
Luddites. Knuckle draggers.
I've only been working with it for about 15 or 20 years.
Oh, guys. Well,
So
whenever you're ready, Jessica. We might
Okay.
pick up.
Yeah, I'll let people in and then I'll just be working. I'll put you on Facebook and then I'll just be working in the background to get that email out real quick. Take me
All right.
about 15 seconds once I get in there.
Okay.
All right, so I will let people in. I will get you guys going on Facebook and then I will
Okay.
bring my attention back once that email is sent.
All right.
good. Hooray.
Well, are you in country, Heidi? Oh, good.
Todd,
I'm in Minneapolis today.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
so they did let you in finally, huh?
Back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry I missed you in the, out in the hills, man. But
Yeah, we are coming
that's
back from
life.
Minneapolis and got stuck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so yeah,
Oh, yeah.
fun
Such
stuff.
is life, Saib.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get started. We expect a few more people to show up because we have a very interesting and timely topic today that we're hoping to have more people's input into. And that is the subject of the banning of books. This is not a new phenomenon. It is not an American phenomenon. It is a phenomenon that has plagued the gathering of knowledge since people started gathering knowledge. You can go back to even the burning of books and whole libraries by conquering armies. Part of it is to destroy people's sense of cohesion and identity, but also it's to say to those people that what you know and what you regard as an important body of knowledge is nothing compared to ours, and ours is the one that we are going to install by virtue of the fact that we have the power to do so. The problem is we often lose in the process of that a lot of human experience, because knowledge really is a collective, how can I say, we have collective ownership of it. Even if one, in air quotes, culture creates it, it becomes a human treasure. It becomes part of the human experience. And I don't know of any major culture, and when I say major, I mean ones that have discretionary income and leisure time, and use that to delve into the arts and sciences to expand their human knowledge. I don't know any that doesn't collect information and disseminate that information. And when we kind of cherry pick it or limit it, we typically find more problems than we find solutions. So with that clever effort to stall for time while more people click join us, I'm going to I'm going to introduce our guest today, Kevin Woster. And those of you who are regular participants in this adventure will have been edified and entertained by Kevin before, because he often has some interesting comments and insight that we found valuable. So today we're going to be talking about our current crises in education. I call it a crisis anyway, and that is the banning or sidelining of books, keeping material and information and ideas away from students. And with that, welcome, Kevin.
Great to be back, as always, and this time in a slightly different role, I guess, although I mouth off even when I'm not in the.
Yeah, that's okay too. And this is a mouth off kind of endeavor here. That's why we're here, is to mouth off.
Before I start, I got an email. I've been talking to a lot of educators in the system who all want protection, as you can imagine. This is a dangerous time for them. It really is, given the mentality here and given some of the school board members that we have. And I got an email from one who said that yesterday she'd noted the students were all noted the increased police presence on the school grounds.
Oh, interesting.
She said 19 children and 2 teachers dead. And we're worried about a book a 17 or 18-year-old might read and 2 paragraphs someone finds objectionable.
Yes.
This started with the English 12 class, a new class that was being developed for seniors only. And they had a committee, teachers primarily, English teachers primarily, to develop this curriculum and find the books for them. 3 teachers, as I understand it, stepped out of the process because they didn't think they were given enough time or resources to do it right. It was rushed. They wanted 1.5 years to 2 years to do it. They got less than a year, as I understand it. And they filled those slots, did the best they could, picked these 5 books, the books that are controversial, and the students would have an option. They weren't being forced to read all 5 books, and some went to one class, some to another, depending on the teacher's preference. Apparently one teacher, a conservative teacher, a conservative Christian teacher, saw a paragraph or a page in one of the books early last year that offended her or him, I guess, I don't know which, and brought it to the administration's attention. And from there, this sort of tumbling effect happened. And the books started to be questioned. One was questioned, another was questioned, and pretty soon 5 books were on the warehouse list to be thrown away or burned or shredded. I'm not sure how they dispose of them. And that was going to run through the Board of Education on a consent calendar, which means you vote for a whole bunch of items, you don't discuss any of them, and away they go. So you might have been sending some chairs and some old computers and some other stuff to the warehouse, and you might have been sending 355 unread books, mostly unpackaged books, to the warehouse or to some other place, a shredder, a burner, or whatever. This came to the public notice. Somebody talked. Somebody always talks. And you know what? They talked to a reporter. Good for them. And so pretty soon this was an issue, and it is an issue. And it's sort of blown up. Along the way somewhere, at least one of the school board members inquired as to whether the teachers that selected these books could be fired for selecting books for their students. And others, apparently there was some discussion about what was in the libraries at Stevens and Central that maybe even went beyond these 5 books, because there's apparently a national hit list in some groups of books that shouldn't be read by vulnerable 17 and 18-year-olds who we all know don't know anything about sex.
How could they if they didn't read it in a book?
Exactly. And so that's kind of where we are today. And it's fortunately that this word got out, the discussion was had. I think the school board is still intent on, another educator said to me, why can't we have a logical, intelligent discussion on each one of these books on its merit, and instead of what we're doing? And well, we're not having that. And it looks like now the issue has been delayed until an election where a couple of school board members were on the ballot. And also probably till summer vacation, and the focus is off, which would be a really good time to get rid of some books, I guess, if you're in that frame of mind. So that's kind of where we are.
Well, I will say that one of the nice things about books, right from the time that Gutenberg pulled off the first piece of paper is that they're reproducible. So you can get rid of them today, but they have a way of like spawning, like, you know, a science fiction movie. You know, it's like, okay, you ban them today, but not only will they come back to this place, but now they're going to come back a lot of places.
Yeah.
So I think that's the signal. Like if somebody pulls that, you just say, oh, well, maybe I should read that. And that's what I'm finding that's happened. Have you seen that happen around Rapid at all?
Well, yeah, there's a lot more discussion, a lot more visibility of them. We brought, that inspired Dave Eggers to come to this town to make an offer to any student that wanted, any senior in town that wanted his book or any of these 4 banned books. He would send them the book for free. None of that happens without this. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on in a good way, as well as under the surface, a lot going on in a not nearly so good a way.
Yes, yes. Well, at least we're bringing out the conversation about not only banning of books, but books in general, like, you know, what their purpose is, what, you know, what advantages they bring us, why they're important. And with that said, I'm hoping that our esteemed panel here, all of us, you know, that's all of everyone on this call is the esteemed panel. I'm hoping that we will all have some input into this conversation, questions, insights, just whatever you think is relevant and can be valuable to the rest of us. I'm certainly interested in your thoughts. So what's being done now, Kevin, as far as what people are doing to, let's say, combat this kind of thing? What's the current state now?
Well, I hope in a couple of instances people are voting. I didn't have a chance to vote for the school board member from my area wasn't up. But people have an opportunity now with early voting and for the June 7th election to vote. And in a couple of instances, there are really clear choices that have been laid out. And one of the former school board members, a really smart young woman named Christine Stephenson, wrote an important essay to the newspaper pointing out that one of the other things that some of the school board members want to do is get rid of, pretty much, it's pretty clear, they don't want to have a superintendent. And I think that's, they think they think maybe they can run the district themselves with principals, but not an overall, at least that's what it looks like.
Well, is that just to fire this current guy, or just, I mean, in perpetuity, they don't, you know,
we're no firing necessary. This current Lori Simon, who's the current superintendent, but is on her way out and announced her plans early last year. I was surprised she made it here as long as she did, not to continue after the school year. So she's on her way out, and they are in no rush apparently to fill that, as I understand it. She's been very low profile over this whole thing, as you can imagine. She's just waiting for the, you know, all the clatter to stop so she can get on to Minnesota or wherever she's heading from here. So that's kind of where we are now, and, you know, vote. And people have been turned out to the school board meeting. There were people there to argue on behalf of books, as there were to argue on behalf of whatever, you know, they feel is dangerous about a page and a half of. And it, just let me point that out. Apparently this is Fun Home, a family tragicomic, which I'd never heard of, and I had never read a graphic comic. And about a year ago, I developed a reading problem, an issue that makes it more difficult for me to read, so I'm limited in that. And I thought, well, I'll try this one, since it's a kind of a comic. It's 200 and some pages, and this is the book that some of the teachers had said, I maybe wouldn't teach that one. It's, you know, it's a tougher book. It's a complicated book, maybe. But it was, one teacher at least thought this was worthwhile. And it's about this young lesbian woman who's discovering herself as she grows in a small town in Pennsylvania, and goes through this, has a complicated family relationship, a dad who is difficult but smart and creative, and a family life that's troubled but loving in some ways. dad kills himself. There's issues in there of suicide and of, you know, discovering yourself in difficult areas. It's it's an amazing book. This is to me, apparently the most controversial. And her artwork is amazing. She is a really good writer that writes in a comic book form, but every page is complicated in the intermix of art and words. And in a 208-page book, there are 2 pages with sex scenes in them, sex drawings that aren't even particularly graphic, of college age girls, women, with having sex. It is so little about sex and so much about life. And it's somebody just had to spend a lot of time. And you got to ask, what's your issue here? That you went through a book like this and the only thing you came out with was 2 pages?
That's the only thing they went for, was those 2 pages.
Well, apparently they were on a hunt for a needle in a haystack, because
Yeah, but you know, sometimes that's the part that they enjoy. And so they want to make sure that no one else has that opportunity. I am drawn to the idea that many times people object to kids seeing things, especially in the school, because the adults don't know how to think about it, you know? And so the adults have this thing that they always have to be on top, you know, they have to be the authority figure, and anything that seems to whittle away at their authority, i.e., you know something or you are interested in something that I don't know anything about. When that happens, the adult can feel undermined and they can feel like destabilized, especially in their sense of needing to be in a position of authority. So I'm wondering if that doesn't play into the idea that, okay, the kids in this school are reading a book, and if they ask me about, take the sex scene away, just take about, you know, all of the other things that are complicated issues that kids clearly have problems with trying to figure it out because they don't live in the same bubble, you know? And so they have questions and they want answers and they want adults to struggle with them. Now they bring it up to an adult, and the adults who are in the position that they think should know, because if probably not their parents, but okay, well, I got this teacher, they have this degree. My parents didn't, you know, go to past 6th grade, but this teacher has this degree, so maybe they can tell me, even if they're the art teacher, you know, they're a teacher. So how do you know, like, how do we bridge that gap, or what would you say about that perception of a gap?
Well, something you mentioned, this is a hard book for me. It's a complicated book, and to be clear, not every student was going to read this book in that class. This was an elective, and they didn't have to read it. This was by choice, and it probably isn't right for every student, and it should be read and discussed with an adult present, with a teacher present, who's going to help, you know, encompass this whole thing, which is what they were all working on. You know, they were all worked on this thing. In today's age, with today's politics and the way that it has permeated all levels of society in this, and I don't, you know, you hate to pick sides because both sides can do tough things, bad things. Right now, most of the blame is on the right side. And I say that as a registered Republican, who's probably not really, but and there is this movement that we take over things from the bottom up, from the school boards, from the conservation districts, from the city councils, from the county, and work our way up because we're saving America. And how can you do all that work if there are all these messages out there that are disturbing to you, or that you think are destroying the culture that you think you're preserving or creating? And people show up at these meetings. Please show up at the meetings and vote and write. Not just your congressional delegation, your mayor, your city council member, and your school board members.
Well, this is a kind of thing, I think, that whether you have kids in school or not, uh, the young people are our wards, so to speak. We're responsible for them, even if they're not our kids, because they are the next generation, and they will need more than their parents to support them enough to be functional members in society. So I'm on the side of the discussion that says it's all our responsibility.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about how, well, let's go first with what are the downsides, as you see it, of banning books or sidelining certain, in air quotes, controversial ideas. What's the downside of that?
First of all, does anybody else have a thought on that, or before I take a shot at it?
Yeah, no, thank you.
I had coffee with two really conservative friends of mine the day before yesterday, and they are also extremely well-read conservative friends and hate the former president. They're 77-year-old twins, and they've been through military service, they've been through the police service, they've been all experienced. They were aghast at this because of history, because they understand history. You don't have to be a conservative or a liberal or in between to, if you read a lot and think a lot. They were offended by it. You don't destroy books. You don't talk about destroying, but if you don't want them, deliver them somewhere else so somebody can use them. But the other thing they said is this thing should have been under the light of day from the very start. And it wasn't. And that's wrong. And I think there are those people on both sides that have this respect and historical perspective on books and what attempts to destroy them mean to a culture and what they are meaning to this culture right now, because a lot of books are being banned, as we know. And the teachers and the educators that I've talked to say they know when they pick a book, if it involves gay author or a gay story, or if it's written by a person of color or minority, they know they have to look at it really hard because it could be controversial. Can you imagine that in America?
Yes.
I bet so. I'll bet so more than I can.
I've lived with it most of my life.
Absolutely. I bet you can. White guy American, me, it's one of those stunning things that you just go, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, to me, that's one of the sad things, is that we have so normalized it that we breathe it in the air and we think that it's normal because it's always been that way. And that's the only perspective we have seen. And that's one of the downsides that I see, is that whether you agree or not, you don't really get depth of field or depth of view without various opinions. Even your two eyes in one head, I often make that point, is that, without two eyes seeing from slightly different angles, you can't have 3D vision, and the world, you run into a lot of things when you don't have 3D vision because you have no idea where the depth is. That's where I think, we're afraid of ideas that challenge our own, but I don't know how we can exist or how we even know what our ideas are without the stress of countervailing winds.
Yeah. One of the things I've always said is that one of the benefits of being a reporter for 40-some years was you get to get up in the morning and go out every day and find out that something you thought you knew you didn't know.
Yes.
Or you didn't know the complete story. And that's the same thing with a book, isn't it?
Yes.
If you're reading widely, every time you pick one up, you go, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I never read a book that I already know what's in it. Because what's the point for me? I mean, I'm dyslexic, so I choose the books I read very carefully because they take me a lot of time and energy. And any book that I feel like, well, I already know what's in there, I don't waste time with it. And what I will do is go to an index and look through the index and the table of contents and the glossary, if it has one, because I mostly read nonfiction books. And if I don't see anything in there that suggests to me that there's something in there that you probably don't know, I'm not reading that book. I'm not wasting my time with that, because there are so many books that do have things that I don't know that I want to know, and I can't read them all. So, so I think having a different opinion or something that, like, what are these guys thinking? I have a lot of Facebook friends in the same way. I don't agree with almost anything they say, but I keep them as Facebook friends, because how else will I have a different opinion or a different point of view if these people don't bring it? Now, if they're nutcases and they just sort of like just spew off stuff and then just take some crazy view, then I don't waste time with them. I may or may not defriend them or something. If they're not rude, then I won't defriend them. I'll just, let's just pass it up. But people who have a different idea, I just think, well, those are some valuable people in my life. Yeah. Anyone else have any ideas about what you think some of the downsides of banning books or sidelining, in air quotes, controversial opinions, ideas are? Are there downsides? Or
I want to throw in one thing that a friend of mine mentioned in a discussion about this, and she's a young woman. She's actually someone I used to babysit, so that makes me feel old. She now has her own children, which she's primarily homeschooled throughout their teenage years, and they read very widely, from the classics to, all sorts of modern things. And one of her comments was that she had seen recently a study that indicated that the average high schooler reads only about 6 minutes a day for pleasure. Now, of course, these school books won't necessarily be reading for pleasure, but if you look at that amount of time, and then you think about the amount of time that those same high schoolers spend on their devices of various kinds, many of which are paid for by their parents, many of which are not monitored whatsoever by their parents, and the kinds of things that they might be seeing there. I mean, I think the more that we limit people's choices in books, the less likely they're going to read. I think that comes from even the beginning. You see people are worried about with elementary schoolers and the Captain Underpants books because they're, inappropriate humor. Well, if you know anything about child development, there's an age they go through where
there's only inappropriate humor, or it's not humor.
Exactly. And I think most librarians and most reading teachers will tell you, let the kids read the things that they're drawn to, so that they have a chance to then expand their base, increase their skills, and maybe move on to a few different things. So I think anytime you limit what someone might have the opportunity to read, you're ultimately going to limit their reading entirely. And I just think that is going to limit their thinking.
So true, Jennifer. I think one of the things that we miss is that, these devices also, you can read on them. And we also miss that before there were the devices, it wasn't like kids were reading and then they discovered devices and stopped reading, So I think it's both. And I think we can encourage kids to, well, one, before you even get to, reading, because that's only one of the ways we can acquire knowledge, an important way, but the only one way. We can encourage young people to be inquisitive. We can support inquisitiveness, and we tend to discourage it, again, because they often will ask questions that will bring us into confrontation about what we think and what we believe, and that can be very uncomfortable, But how do we prepare the young people for the lives they're going to lead without some event being uncomfortable, or something being uncomfortable? Anybody have an idea how that could be done? Because I'd be interested.
While they're thinking, I've heard from educators here and from other towns about these books, and, for example, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. A number of educators said to me, I can't express to you enough how this book connected us with all of the students who read it, but with some of them in particular. and how it sort of changed their presence in my classroom. It changed the way they looked at school, looked at life, looked at themselves in a positive way. And I've spoken to a couple of younger people who said the same thing. They felt seen after that. They felt connected after that. Fun Home, I can imagine, connects with people. They're people that can, especially young people, that feel this is me. This is me. And I read it and say, this is not me. This is so not me. And I need to understand this other person, these other people so much. And it was a challenge. It is a challenge for me to come to that understanding. And it was written to be a challenge, by a person who's accustomed to challenges every day, so.
One of the things that I notice is when people have books or ideas that they, find uncomfortable, is that when they validate them, or when they validate some other people, sometimes they feel invalidated. In other words, if you feeling like, well, let's say in this particular case, homosexuality is just wrong, full stop. If there's a book that humanizes those people and makes them seem, because part of their lives are an overlay of yours, you've had difficult maybe time with your parents or some of the other things that they're going through, since the book is not just about, in air quotes, homosexuality, there are other things that might make you feel some connection to that person. But now you have the cognitive dissonance. Well, they're like me, but I'm not gay, So for some people that cognitive dissonance is very disturbing. And so I'm just wondering, how do we help people have the courage to be comfortable with people and ideas that are not a singular overlay of themselves? In other words, there's this identity thing of, I feel validated, I read this book, but there's also that I feel invalidated because I read this book. Lanico?
I'm going to jump in and say something
Sure.
that probably needs editing. Well, what I would like to say is that we live in a culture of inclusiveness and exclusiveness. And when we think about books, the inclusiveness of being able to make those discoveries by ourselves, for ourselves, that's what lies in the library. It lies in someone's suggestion that you will find this interesting, or it'll open your eyes to something new, or all of the above. I find that in this public school system, the way it runs in South Dakota, there is very much exclusiveness regarding that ability to go out and make an adventurous drive into self-discovery through books.
And because something too to add on to that, it's hard for some people, because we were lucky in my family. My brother wrote a column this week about, my brother Terry, Jennifer's dad, wrote a column this week about books in our family. And that was something that we were always given time for by our dad, who's a farmer, and our mom, who was a farm wife. And that's all she ever wanted to be. We always had time to read, and they always made books available and always gave us that time. And my dad served, especially near the end of his life. He died of cancer in 1968. And a book came out in 1963 called The American Way of Death. And it was one of those first, in my experience, sort of hardcore digging journalism books, where they looked at the mortuary business, they looked at the undertaking industry, the mortuary science industry, and funeral home business. And it was a hard-hitting book. And my dad fought to have that in the Chamberlain City Library. And as you can know, every town of that size had a funeral home with a guy that was pretty well connected in the community because everybody had to deal with him sooner or later.
Yeah.
And this was pretty controversial at the time, and he had to work over the objections of some of the board members to get that in. And shortly thereafter that he died. And I don't know if that was a premonition he had that that something was coming, that this is more important to him. But he also believed in stretching, and I think Terry wrote in there that we were never questioned in anything we brought home from the library. And of course, there are some of those books we brought home, some of those classics. There are pages in those books, we touched on it, that would offend the people that were offended by this, certainly.
I'm surprised that they haven't objected to the Bible being in there, because there's some pretty risque passages in there too. They didn't hold back.
No.
There was a lot of begatting going on.
Yeah. The educators, again, here, and I've reached out, or some have reached out to me by social media, if say that they list the number of classic books and the passages that would be banned by this kind of a presentation. And several of them said, what would we teach? What would we teach in literature?
Yeah, exactly. And you also have that whole slippery slope thing, which is not always applicable, but in this case, it seems to be, because, you get a wedge and you started doing that, and then you start culling books. And then pretty soon you may be allowed to have the dictionary, but even the dictionary, go through the dictionary and see if you don't find, the definitions of words. And how do you have a dictionary that's a full dictionary that doesn't have words like homosexuality? Which dictionary are you going to give to an inquiring mind? But I think it should be noted here, because I think we would be remiss without paying attention to it, that there are many people who feel that they should have the first and last say about what others know.
Yeah.
They should be the guardians of knowledge, just not books, any knowledge. They should be the ones to say this is truth and this is not truth. And part of what has happened over time is that we have overcome that hurdle by having something called public schools, because there was a time when only certain people had books, had the leisure time and discretionary income to own books, and had libraries, and they were thought to be the only ones who were capable of having ideas that were worthwhile. Public schools put the lie to that. And there are a lot of people who resent that. Public schools have not always been, and is not today, they are not today respected by everybody.
Yeah.
Some people would, so sometimes what we see as a controversy, whether it's school shootings or libraries, is just one part of the effort to just get rid of public schools. That's my observation.
Yeah, and so sometimes the people who don't respect and value public schools sit on public school boards.
Yes, for the sole reason, just like the woman who was the Secretary of Education. She didn't believe in public schools. She was there to destroy the public school system. That was her objective. And you're right. I mean, at least that's my observation. If someone else has another observation of where people are saying, okay, yeah, let's improve the public schools. If you have a school board that's doing that, typically you have better schools.
Well, I don't think, hi, this is Janet Brown. Hi, Kevin, how are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. And I think we need to, when we take a look at history and how humans have dealt with each other throughout history, it was always, it's always about the power that I want to control this situation. I want to, and so in order to control situations, you have to control knowledge. And so, all people who have been at some point oppressed, including women, was like this: you're not important enough to learn to read. You're not important enough to have this knowledge. We can't, and all of that comes from fear, right? The fear of losing that power and losing control. And so this ability of others, like Lawrence, like you said, the ability of others to feel that they have the power to tell you what you can or cannot do or read or know is, you know, I mean, certainly it is the antithesis of what this country is kind of about in terms of being a republic and egalitarian and all of that business, right? But in the reality of how humans treat each other, it's all about holding that power, and historically has always been that way, right? And we think that maybe haven't come very far, but in a lot of ways we've come a long ways from 400 years ago in this country. And we have to hold on to that, right? And we have to know that it is always vulnerable to loss. So if we don't speak up, if we don't go to those school board meetings, if we don't go to city councils and say, this is, you know, I mean, I've spent most of my life in the arts, and censorship is a huge part of, and punishment for doing bad plays like Angels in America, or, you know, is always there. It's always there, because every time there's one side, one opinion, there's the opposite. And you have to be ready to counteract that opposite whenever it arises, right?
Yes. And we can let the ideas struggle, and they should struggle with each other instead of us struggling, you know, and that's an insight that seems to be missing in our education, is that the ideas that we have, we don't really have to marry them. You know, we can put those ideas out. If I have an idea, I put it out with the express and implied and expressed, how can I say, objective of having it challenged. You know, because a lot of ideas that I have, they are not fully formed, you know, or I have a sense that they're not fully formed, but I also recognize they won't be fully formed without stress on them. And so I put them out there so that they will get stress on them. I really can't see how an idea can gain strength and gain, you know, if they are not stressed. And so I'm always looking for, is there another way to do that? If there is, I haven't found it. Anyone else? Todd,
Hey,
AKA
So-
Heidi.
yeah, you know, Kevin brought up something earlier, and I think one of these things, I mean, this comes about at a time, as you've seen, I mean, it's a culmination of things that have happened. I think, you know, because actions like this, and I always think about this, I like, well, 30 years ago, how did this not happen? Or 40 years ago, why didn't this happen? Or, you know, and so part of it is, I mean, I'm looking at what do people do to combat it? Because part of it is sunlight, like light on the situation. This action in particular that you brought up was buried in a mass movement, you know, like almost a cursory thing would just handle that maybe would happen with not anybody seeing it unless one person saw it and was willing to step forward and talk about it, which the second part is often much harder than the first. You might notice it and just go, wow, I can't believe that, and let it go. And then it happens. But individually, that's tough because there's so many voices and there's a lot less, like, you know, I feel like, you know, systems have weakened a bit, and I'm not talking just about governmental systems, but I'm talking all systems as they've been stressed, you know, as far as shedding more light on it and being more communal. It's kind of like there's more communication, but it's so buried in the mass that we don't see things like this. And it makes it tougher sometimes to step up. And it's easier for groups to coalesce and say, okay, we're going to do this movement and get it out, like you said, without anybody noticing. It's easier because we're busy, we're looking at different things. School boards, lower level things, like you brought up, lower level, ground level things. They just don't get
got stuck.
Yeah.
Can you say that again, Todd? You got stuck.
Oh, I'm sorry. Like the lower level boards, you know, and I'm not talking like US Senate and stuff. I'm talking at the, you know, real community levels. Those seem to get less
notice than they did before, because either you were more involved with the community or there was more focus put on them. There was more light shed on them through whatever means, reporting or just knowledge around town kind of thing. How do people, I mean, how do you stay abreast of that? Because it isn't movements like this. I'm sure it's much easier to move things below the radar. I know you brought up voting, which is big. It's huge. There's probably nothing more direct. But beyond that, how do you stay abreast of it? Because you're a reporter, you've done this, you know that process, but how does someone who isn't a reporter live in that world?
And well, you touch on something. As you and I know, there are less than half of the reporters operating in this state and nation that there used to be. Probably a third or less of what there used to be. How do these smaller boards get covered? How do these smaller issues get covered in a time when you would have somebody that covered it all the time? School board was part of their beat. Now they catch it if they can, when they can. And I think that's as dangerous as any of this is, as my two conservative friends said, this should have the light shined on it. Well, a lot of times the people that are involved in it don't want the light shined on it. And so that's a struggle that the public has, because a lot of times the public doesn't even know what's going on, because the few reporters left don't even know what's going on or don't get to it. Which, I have a plug here. That's why public broadcasting, the nonprofits like South Dakota News Watch and your local paper, and the people that are still trying to put out the news need our help too. The Journal has had some really good coverage and some extraordinary opinion pieces on this, leadership type opinion pieces. Give him a plug.
Go ahead.
Kent Bush has been, the editor of the Journal, has been really exemplary on this.
This brings up the question of how we get information and how do we discern its reliability.
Yeah.
And as much as we can say about social media, it beats the heck out of coffee, because there's usually one sort of like dominating voice or a couple of people who get emotional about everything, and then pretty soon, even if their opinion doesn't carry, it shuts down useful conversation because people don't want to have an argument when they just came to have a nice cup of coffee and hang around with friends. So for many people, that is their only access to whatever's happening. They don't know. They're not watching TV. They're not on the internet. They're not on any of those things. And you think, okay, well, if you don't have any of those things and you don't have books, you don't read newspapers, how are you connected with the rest of the world? And for them, maybe their objective is to be disconnected. You say, okay, well, then don't complain when it doesn't go wrong, when it doesn't go like you want it. Because your complaint is at least not heard here, because either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution, and we can't do everything, but we can all do something. So we get back to how do we get information that allow us to do something, even though I don't see how it's possible for all of us to be engaged with all of the issues. I just don't see that. But we can all do one little thing, even if it's help the kid next door in their coloring book. We can do something. And that's an important thing. That kid feeling paid attention to could give them the courage and strength and the support to at least not be a criminal. Even if they're not going to do something great, they didn't do something bad because they felt like, well, nobody cares about me and I just feel bad. And so I'm going to make somebody else feel bad. So I'm just looking for like, well, how do we even know that there's a thing that we can do? Anybody else have ideas about where we can get information, including books?
I'm going to jump in again. This is Laniko, and
Sure.
I was just going to say, growing up on a reservation where there were very few books in our homes, and we had my big place to go to was like in the library. Once I discovered the little library, reading, to sum it all up, reading for me was eliminating the fear of new situations. I was in several new situations throughout my life, and I came to the realization that if I knew a little bit more about this situation, I would understand it better, and I would have a sense of, trying to alleviate some of the anxiety. Most of you who I see many names of people I know, they knew, that I have been a product of a boarding school and mission school education. And both of them were both those types of education. There were fearful situations in both. And I came to understand that reading was, you were talking about a solution. Reading for me was a solution to alleviate my personal fears for some things that I didn't quite understand. So I didn't just read one perspective. I tried to be very diverse in my search for understanding. As I was thinking about that, I was also thinking about reading alleviates inflexibility. In this particular country, we have so many people who are they're frozen in a state of thinking, of being, of interacting with others. They insulate themselves in ways that make it possible for them to bury whatever limitations they have. They bury themselves in it. And when they do that, it affects the body. It affects your dream sleep. It affects everything about you. And eventually that inflexibility is expressed. You become a statistic, a medical statistic, because that inflexibility is one of the criteria for cancer and some of the other kinds of debilitating circumstances of our life. So reading is something that I hold up in such a high place of being able to become a human. You get to know somebody else, whatever complexities they present. When they do, through reading, you can digest it a little at a time until finally there's a human connection. And that human connection makes it possible for us to see others without a veil of fear, of ignorance. I just thought I would throw that out there.
Very useful. I don't know who could be calling me at this moment.
Lawrence, you touched on the coffee shop versus the social media. And of course, social media is this huge concept.
Exactly.
And it is amazingly valuable and enlightening and inspiring if it's used properly. If you don't go to two sites that affirm what you already believe and maybe affirm it in a horrible way, a dangerous way, a limiting way, a shrinking way. And unfortunately, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a large percentage of the people who are on social media all the time use it in that way. And the guy that you talked about yelling at coffee, those are social media trolls, and they're all over the place. And they intimidate a lot of the average folks, whatever average is, but a person that just gets on there and wants to have a conversation. Pretty soon some lunatic from New Jersey is, just attacking him and maybe even threatening him, and that's enough. That's all I want of that. Like you say, they leave the coffee shop or they do stay silent. But it has to be used right. It's an amazing resource that is all too often being misused, I'm afraid.
Yes. Like any other kind of media or any other tool, it can be misused, and it can also be used for good. And I know, at least for myself, I use it to stress test my ideas. I may not, and I only say that maybe once every quarter to remind people that, like I expect, it's okay if, I'm not going to disown you as a friend because you disagree with me on Facebook, but when you come with a different idea, be ready to defend it. That's all I ask. Bring me mutually verifiable data and critical thinking. Show me how you think. Even if I still disagree with you, I can only accept your point of view if you can defend it, because it's not mine. I don't know how to defend it. So if somebody has a different point of view, I expect them to be able to say, hey, I have this information, and when I put it together this way, the situation looks like this. I'm good. Even if I disagree with you, I'm good, and I can respect that point of view. But if you just say, oh, I ate this really big bowl of chili last night, and last night I had this dream that informed me of my opinion today, homie's not going for that. I'm not on that boat. I'm not on that bus. So we're coming up on the end of our time here today, and I want to make sure that anyone else who has some insight into how the limiting of information, and under that the banning of books or the marginalizing of books, how that might affect your life or our lives in general. Anybody else have any comment? Janet, were you going to say something else?
Well, I was just going to add that I think that part of the problem with us wanting to be advocates is, or find out about information so that we can change this, what's going on in some way, is that social media what we've discovered is that social media is so frustrating that way. You can't have an argument with somebody on Facebook. I mean, it just doesn't ever work, really. And it's not like a discussion. It's not like sitting down and exchanging ideas, or Twitter, or it is a bombardment that goes, for some people, that goes one way, and that's from me to out there to the world, right? As opposed to an intersection or interchange of ideas. And so we become, it almost is, instead of using it as, I always say to people, we are so lucky to live in a world where you have a library. My first job was in a library when I was in 6th grade. And we are so lucky to live in a world where we walk around with a library of information in our pockets to find out what the truth is, to verify things, to, all of that. And, but I think that social media for some people has been such a bad experience. I stopped being on social media because it's like, I can't have that kind of exchange with people that I know I'm not changing their mind and they're not changing my mind, because, and I think that's part of just who I am. I'm all about trying to change people's minds. And so are they. So it becomes this, so we have to find other ways, to do that, I guess. And not easy.
Yes. Well, I used to try to change people's minds, and then I realized I was really changing my own mind, because when I started listening to them, I said, oh yeah, well, maybe that's another way to think about it. But one of the things I try to do now is to engage people with mutually verifiable facts or ideas and critical thinking. And I call on them to do the same thing. And I make it plain that, hey, look, if you have an idea that you think is worth putting on Facebook or introducing to other people, bring that. If you bring that, we can have a discussion. If you just talk about, well, I'm thoroughly convinced this is the way it is, that's fine, as long as it only exists in your head. But once you bring it out to the public, and we all have to live in that, then we all have something to say about it. And if you don't want that, then okay, stay in your hole, whichever silo you're in. I try to remind people of that. And let's say I'm as forceful about that as they are about their opinion. And I just say, okay, to me, that's not an opinion. It's like, if you disagree with that, tell me why you disagree. Tell me how, without agreeing on terms, you can have a conversation. Tell me how just putting up a meme and saying this is right and nothing else exists. Tell me how either of us benefit from that. I'm listening. And most, what I've seen is, one, the unfortunate thing is fewer people actually interact with
You're
me. They
right.
just sort of like let it go, because they know exactly what I'm going to say.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
show me the data. You making a point to say, hey, this thing is like this. And my reaction is, show me the data, and you got my attention. And I think that that's a way, that's something that books can give us. We can say, hey, look, I got this idea from this book, and this person says they got it from this experience, or this thing happened. So if you have a different book that says a different thing happened, bring that. And that's why I'm against banning books, because now we don't have that, that other option of other people's experience. Kevin, you have any last words of wisdom for us as we tune out here?
Only that, just to be clear, I don't want to make it seem like our home was completely free of censorship. When back on the farm, when we would get the new Sears Roebuck Montgomery Awards catalog, my mother would go through with colors, and in the underwear section, sometimes she would fill in some spots if she thought they needed to be expanded a little bit.
Yeah.
So like a 2-piece could go to a full-piece bathing suit, for example.
Well, see, I use those to as my coloring books.
Yeah. So those were her coloring book. Not to be a family joke. Who could get the Montgomery Awards before mother colored the lingerie?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's amazing how many things that just because you say, oh, that's not, don't pay attention to that.
I'd never cared about the lingerie section before.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was such a thing as lingerie. But then, hey, why is this one all highlighted? I guess that means it's important. I should be reading that. Well, it's been another wonderful morning. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you will join us again. I'll remind you, we use the same link every week. So if you somehow don't get the link, use the one you got last time, or maybe cut and paste it somewhere, and it should work. So until next week, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you same time, same station, and keep on reading.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you today.
Keep reading.